I let loose one, then the other in rapid succession, then turned and ran back through the bungalows and the lunch area and finally reached the fence on 71st. Stopping to put the shotgun in my waistband, I saw a car bend the corner. I held the shotgun outside and ducked behind a trash bin to let the car pass. It was occupied by two older civilians. When I got back up and shoved the gun in my waistband, I jumped. The barrels were still hot and burned my private parts. Holding the gun in my hands, I scaled the fence. I ran back to where I had left the bike and goddamn, someone had stolen it. Now I began to panic because Western Avenue, the first parallel, was over a block away. Surely I thought the survivors would be in the vehicle looking for their assailants, and they'd be armed. Besides, I had no shells. I turned on my heels and trotted down 71st, trying to stay as close as possible to the lawns in case I had to run through a yard. Once I got to the first parallel, I felt better, but no safer. The barrels had cooled down enough now to put the gun in my waistband, so I hid the weapon. Finally, I made my way down our driveway and into the house. I reloaded the shotgun and laid it against the stereo speaker. I then turned on the TV and watched the Benny Hill show. I felt much better. The next night, while Gangster Brown and I were traversing to a party in the hood, an undercover car pulled up to a stop behind us. Both police officers exited the car and approached us. "Monster, what's up?" the first officer with a fake appearance of friendship. "Nothing," I said with as much deceiving concern as I could muster. Actually, nothing but hostility between us and them, but some officers try to put on a jovial show of cosmetic concern to woo the naive banger into a trusting relationship with them. "Listen," the officer continued, "Auto Detail wants to talk to you about a stolen car. Now I know that ain't your style, and I told them that, but you need to come down to the station and iron it out." My instinct said run, but I didn't. I said, "Man, you know I don't be stealing no cars. That's bullshit." "Yeah, we know, but it's best if you clear this up now." His partner had now joined in on the friendly persuasion. I looked at Brown to see what he thought. "Don't worry, Brown," the first officer said. "We'll bring Monster right back to the party." Still, Brown said nothing, but now I was being handcuffed. I told Brown that I'd see him later and to hold down the party until I got back. He said he would. After we drove off, the jovial facade vanished. "Monster Kody," the driver said, as if weighing the poundage of my name. "You are in big trouble." Damn, I felt claustrophobic, trapped and helpless. "You cannot keep going around killing people and leaving witnesses." He was shooting stares at me through the rearview mirror as he spoke. "Now we got you. You done fucked up this time. Yup. Got an eyewitness who saw you plain as day. But listen," he continued. "What's been eating away at me is this. Was that you driving that Burgundy Grand Prix that shot Lip Dog from the brim, which we chased and lost?" His eyes held mine for a moment. "Nah, man, that wasn't me." "Oh, you can tell us. We don't give a fuck one way or the other. I just wanted to compliment you on your driving." Now he broke a faint smile. "Oh, incidentally, Lip Dog survived those 4 holes you put in his chest." "I told you, man, that wasn't me." "Well, listen, Ace Rat said that he saw you kill his homeboy DC last night." He was now speaking in a matter-of-fact tone. "We wouldn't even bother with it if he hadn't positively ID'd you." But he continued, "Ace Rat ain't gonna be no good witness, no way. Hell, he shot his own brother today." With that, he winked in the rearview mirror. Now, I was really wondering what was going on. How had anyone seen me under the cover of darkness? Or better yet, had anyone actually seen me? And if so, why hadn't there been mention of the others who had been shot? I distinctly remember counting 5 people out there. From 17 feet with the sawed off, everyone was getting sprayed. Besides, they had been standing in a tight circle, and I had used double buckshot. Surely, I'd also have some assault charges and perhaps attempted murder as well. But this went unmentioned during our ride to the station. At the station, I found out more. According to the homicide detectives handling the case, myself, Sidewinder, who had been captured, and an unidentified driver, several 60s on the corner of 67th and Van Ness had opened fire with a 9mm and a .22 rifle. I supposedly had possession of the .22 and had allegedly shot Delta Thomas, aka DC, several times. He was said to have run a half a block and then expired. Sidewinder had supposedly supplied cover fire. I had been positively identified as the murderer of Delta Thomas. Of course, I knew I had not shot DC, but how could I explain that I had been at another site, possibly killing other 60s? I had no alibi as to my whereabouts that night. I made no statement at the station other than I want to speak to my attorney. I was asked a series of questions ranging from how old I was, most of the policemen who couldn't believe I was 16, to what my body count was. I shook them off with ignorant stares and shoulder hunches. Later, after what seemed like hours in the cooling tank, a deliberately chilled holding cell designed to keep its occupants freezing and uncomfortable, I was transported to the Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. There I was strip searched, made to shower, dressed in jail clothes, and escorted to the box. The box is actually solitary confinement, where those being held for murder 1 are sent for 7 days. I was not sweating the case in the least. In fact, once I was put in my room, I went directly to sleep. But when I awoke the next morning, I felt the strain of being captured. Now, I'm quite used to being trapped behind a heavy metal door or a barrage of bars. Even behind Pelican Bay's 8,200 holes and metal slab over the entire front of my cell with multiple holes drilled in it, I can function quite normally. But back in those days, before my prison life conditioning, I had a hard time coping with cell living. In those days, my writing and reading were bad. I couldn't compose a decent letter or even read a whole comic book. I began to think about my schooling and my relationship with my mother, which had deteriorated to a series of staring matches where we couldn't even stand to be in each other's company for any length of time. I felt she didn't understand my generation. She, on the other hand, said I was a no-good hoodlum. Our clashes were frequent. On my second day in solitary, she came to see me. I strode out into the day room visiting area and sat next to her. For a few seconds, she said, then she looked straight into my eyes with the most puzzling look and spoke through quivering lips. Kody, what has happened to you? What is wrong? And for the first time in a while, I started to shed tears and could not speak. Raising my head to look her honestly in the eyes, I said, I don't know, and I meant it. My life was totally consumed by all aspects of gang life. I had turned my bedroom into a virtual command post, launching attacks from my house with escalating frequency. My clothes, walk, talk, and attitude all reflected my love for the allegiance to my set. Nobody was more important than my homeboys. Nobody. In fact, the only reason my little brother and I stayed close is because he joined the set. Anybody else I had nothing in common with. My transformation was subtle. I guess this is why most parents can't nip it in the bud. How? I was 6 years old when the Crips started. No one anticipated its sweep. The youth of the South Central were being gobbled up by an alien power threatening to attach itself to a multitude of other problems already plaguing them. An almost enemy subculture had arisen, and no one knew from where it came. No one took its conception serious, but it slowly crept, saturating entire households, city blocks, neighborhoods, and eventually the nation-state of California. Today, no school, library, institution, business, detention center, or church is exempt from being touched in some way by the gang activity in South Central. Per year, the gangs in South Central recruit more people than the 4 branches of the U.S. Armed Forces do. Crack dealers employ more people in South Central than AT&T, IBM, and Xerox combined. And South Central is under more aerial surveillance than Belfast, Ireland. Everyone is armed, frustrated, suppressed, and on the brink of explosion. I had no adequate answer then for Mom about what was happening to me. Actually, I wasn't fully aware of the gang's strong gravitational pull. I knew, for instance, that the total lawlessness was alluring and that the sense of importance, self-worth, and raw power was exciting, stimulating, and intoxicating beyond any other high on this planet. But still, I could not explain what had happened to pull me in so far that nothing outside of my set mattered. In the years since, I have battled with my intellect to find an adequate answer to that question. Not to justify my participation, but to see what makes others tick. I have always been a thinker, not necessarily academically, but more on a psychological level. I have always been interested in how people think, what causes any particular thought, and so on. Action and reaction has always held my attention. After Mom left, I felt extremely bad and a bit torn. I was restless. and the days seemed to drag on forever. On my third day in Los Padrinos, my name was called for release. When I got up to the front to the administration building, I found out that my case had been rejected for prosecution by the district attorney's office. Mom was there to pick me up. On our way home, she tried to make me commit to stop banging and get back in school. I told her I was in school, and to this, she angrily retorted, "To learn, damn it, to learn." The fact is, I was being bused to an all-American white school in Woodland Hills, El Camino Real High, with some promises from Mom and some stern commitments from my probation officer. I was able to get in right out of juvenile camp. I went to school every day, but I never attended classes. Academics just couldn't hold my attention. The only reason I went at all was because the long trip from South Central to the San Fernando Valley, during which I was able to take in some awesome sights. Any relief from the drab grayness of the city was welcome, so I went along for the ride. Once there, I get with the others who had no interest in academia, and we'd stand around and pose in all of our cool South Centralness. The punk movement was in full swing at that time, and the Valley punk rockers initially mistook us, the 8 of us who were steeped in the subculture of banging, for punk rockers because of our dress code. Perhaps they thought we were their new African counterparts from the city. We dressed almost alike, but it was only coincidence. We had never seen or heard of punk rockers before coming out to the Valley. A couple of us thought they were Crips. We circled one another in an attempt to distinguish authenticity, then finally made a pact and began to hang out together. But eventually I had to stop going to school there altogether because the 60s discovered the bus route, which ran through their hood. One day they stood and taunted the bus, and the next day they shot it up. By the third day, I was not on that bus anymore. Now, as if all other attempts would be useless, Mom gave up trying to persuade me. I mad dogged every occupant of every car that came to us, giving everyone a deliberately evil stare. I had perfected this look, and no one except other serious soldiers could hold my stare. I now understand the look. It's not how you stare at someone, but what you've been through that others can see in your eyes that tells them that you're the wrong one to fuck with. Some refer to this as the 1,000-yard stare. Once I had gotten home, showered, and geared up, my shaking mentality of the day before vanished as I was back in county. Once I had gotten home, showered, and geared up, my shaking mentality of the day before vanished as I was back in country, in the war zone, and conditions dictated that I think in accord with my present situation. I called around to notify the homies of my release and my continued support and participation in the war, which had just escalated to another level. Krizik's sister had been kidnapped by the 60s from LA County Jail after she had gone to visit him. She was a civilian with no ties to gang activity other than her relation with Triz. So now kidnapping had been added to the list of tactics used to terrorize the other side in the withdrawal. Back in 1980, unlike today, there were no high rollers or ballers substantially anchored in any particular hood. High roller is Crip terminology for a ghetto-rich drug dealer. Baller is the equivalent in blood language. So the kidnapping had nothing whatsoever to do with ransom. This was a straight, ruthless move designed to strike terror in us. But of course, it didn't work. A meeting was held for a select few who, it was determined, could pull themselves a notch above the latest terrorist attack and commit an even more hideous act to show the 60s that two can play this game. Only our target would not be a civilian, but one of their troopers. We plotted and planned most of the night trying to decide on which act would most grab their attention. We pondered castration, blinding, sticking a shotgun up the victim's rectum and pulling the trigger, and cutting off his ears. The latter, we felt, would be most significant. After all, killing him would be too easy, too final. No, we wanted him to live, to be a walking reminder of our seriousness. After deciding our course of action and selecting those to carry it out, we sat and waited to hear the fate of Chris's sister. Finally, after 3 days of suspense, she was found in one of the 60 schoolyards. She had been raped repeatedly, stabbed numerous times, and left for dead. Fortunately, she lived. That very night, our selected crew was sent out to complete its first, but not last, extra vicious act of warfare. Combing the streets of the 60s hood in a desperate attempt to find one of their shooters, the crew drove block after block, stopping civilians to ask the whereabouts of such notables as Pettywhack, Poochie, Kedra Rock, Mumbles, or Snoop Dogg, their elite crew of shooters. Finding none of them around, they settled for an up-and-coming ghetto star. They seized him, beat him into submission, and chopped off both his arms at the elbow with machetes. One arm was taken and one arm was discarded down the street. Later that night, we partied and had a good time. The arm that was taken was brought to the meeting as proof of completion. There were no further kidnappings, and our war plotted on an inordinary fashion after this. During the ensuing investigation, the police department's frustration arose not as a result of the act per se, but from their inability to find the victim's other limb. We learned from this that there was a deterrent to certain acts. We had quite possibly laid down a rule that certain things just wouldn't be tolerated.